do you do?
I took my past. Where have you gone? I soon will see. A most wondrous rest of grace.
God turned my switch back on.
Against the dying of the light.
Hi, Jon. Thanks for joining us. Do you want to just start off and tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, where did you grow up and what your childhood was like?
Yeah, so I'm Jon Housholder. I co-own a film company called Unrivaled Films with my business partner, Jeff Schaefer, who's one of my best friends. I grew up in West Des Moines, Iowa, which is in an area that a lot of people don't go to a lot of the times if you're not from that part of the country, but it's a wonderful community. Grew up there aspiring to make films as a kid. And this was a time when the internet wasn't really around because I'm a 90s kid and didn't really know how to go about doing that. And by the time I got to college, I started, working in studying to be like a news anchor, essentially. When I was a kid, I made like little movies and stuff like that. But like I said, I just didn't know how to go about making films or anything. And one thing led to another. I studied, journalism. And then that turned into my senior year being like, oh no, I don't know if I want to do this. And then I kind of started doing a little bit of other things with production that I had learned through my journalism skills of editing and stuff. My brother and I kind of started making some films. There was a capstone class in college that I took where we had to kind of make a documentary, and one thing led to another. And then I was working for a company called Menards right out of college, which is like a home improvement store up in Wisconsin. It's a big home improvement, Lowe's, Home Depot type thing in the Midwest. Did all their commercials for about 2 years, and then ended up at NASCAR after that through really just kind of pitching myself to the president of NASCAR at a racetrack in Chicago when I was 23 years old, I believe. So it was wild. So I one thing led to another, and then I went to NASCAR, and then I kind of honed in on the film thing there, started working on some documentaries, and then that led into kind of what I'm doing today. So crazy stuff, man. I mean, it's nuts. Like when I look back on it, and there's a lot of details in there too, but I can go into those if you want. I don't have to, but whatever you want.
So good. Were you into like NASCAR growing up, or like cars in general? Like what kind of things were you into, like riding bikes and that kind of thing?
I was, so funny you say that. I was when I was a kid, like my neighborhood was like shaped kind of like a horseshoe. And so we would have bike races around there. There was so many kids like my age, like around that age, my brother and I's age. My brother's 2 years younger than me. So it was really, everyone was within, like, I was kind of in the middle. There were kids like 2 years older than me and then 2 years younger than me. And we would have these really competitive events all the time, whether it was like, some type of sport. We always did like football, basketball, but then we did bike racing. And I loved NASCAR. Like that was, 90s NASCAR was like awesome. I don't know. I was so into it. And so to like do bike racing was kind of like the closest thing I could get to being a race car driver at that time, because I was like in third grade and it was super cool. And so we would just race around there. We even had like pit stops. We had crew chiefs. So we had like little walkie-talkies on our bikes when we were riding around the neighborhood. And we would have some people like film it as if it was like a broadcast. It was really like over the top, but it was so cool as a kid. Like our neighborhood really did it up with all these things, like, for every sport, but bike racing was like a big thing for all of us for some reason. So we always did that. But I was a big NASCAR fan. Like I was a huge Jeff Gordon fan as a kid. I fell in love with NASCAR after the first race I went to when I was in the third grade. I went to Pocono Raceway out in Pennsylvania, and I remember like just falling in love with it. I mean, like I think Jeff Gordon got like second in that race, but I was just hooked instantly. I couldn't believe how fast the cars were going. The pageantry at a race is outstanding. I think that's why like a lot of Americans are getting into F1 now, because the pageantry for F1 is incredible. And that was kind of the vibe I was getting as a kid when I went to the NASCAR race. I was like, oh my gosh, this is one of the coolest experiences I've ever had in my short 8-year lifespan at that time. So it was awesome. But yeah, I'm a big NASCAR fan as a kid and into cars in general. So yeah.
And then what came first? I guess cars. And then how did you get into like the interest in filmmaking? Did you see any like films as a young kid, like maybe movies at the cinema or on VHS or whatever? Like what kind of films were you watching back then?
Yeah. So when I was a kid, I was so into, I remember when I was like 3, I fell in love with this Disney film called Fantasia. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's like, it's just kind of all over the place, but it's a Disney film and it's just so abstract, but so awesome. And I remember being like 3 and just falling in love with it. And I always would watch it over and over and over and over again. That's before Netflix. That's when you just had like VHS tapes and just rewind it. So I watched that. And then I got really into like Home Alone, obviously. And then I remember like as a kid, like kind of starting to like reenact some of the scenes. Like when I was like, a lot of kids do that when they're younger. I was doing it too. And then we had a home video camera. And then when I got a little older, to like 6 or so, my brother and I kind of started filming little videos around the house. And we're like, oh, this is really fun. So we kind of got into that aspect of it. And then we didn't even really know how to edit. So we were kind of editing with just the camera. So you could hear us on there like, all right, go, and then like we'd redo the scene and try to tape over it and we would do terrible. And so like, it was just, we were getting some reps in though, when we were younger and we didn't even realize it. It was just something we wanted to do. And I was always filming. Then it kind of turned into, when I got a little older, the videos got really goofy. We were just, making funny videos to make funny videos. And the ironic thing is, when I was younger, I started doing like these like NASCAR type videos when I got into NASCAR when I was kind of in like 4th grade. And there's like this funny clip that I found in myself when I was going through like home videos one time, and I'm talking about NASCAR, and I was doing like these little stop motion races, which were really, honestly, like looking back, they were not good. But like when I was a kid, it was so cool. So like I built like a little racetrack and I had the cars going around, and then I had a commercial break and I had a Menards commercial, and it was just so funny because it's such a foreshadow to like what I ended up doing like as I got older. Because I worked at Menards, made their commercials for 2 years, and then I worked for NASCAR. So it's just like some of those videos you come back on, you stumble upon. It's really funny. But yeah, I remember being really inspired by Fantasia was the first movie, and then like Home Alone and Space Jam. That was huge when I was like in 2nd grade. But I was really into, I would say those Fantasia and Home Alone were kind of the first 2 big movies I was really into.
You mentioned you worked for NASCAR. Was there like any kind of film related projects along the way that was kind of like that you were getting paid for, or did that come later?
That came late. I mean, going into NASCAR, I hadn't really done a film per se. I'd done commercials, with the Menards job. I did do a couple student films when I was in college. That, I mean, they were just we just kind of made them. I made them for classes. They never really would go anywhere. I mean, I did intern at a news station, was fortunate enough to go on air when I was going into my senior year at a station in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And I learned a lot doing stuff there, but that was like not a film by any means. That was just me doing TV reporting. So when I went to NASCAR, I was actually doing a little bit of reporting again. I was doing some of the race highlights on the weekends, going on camera again, and just doing race recaps. And then when I would go to the track, I would interview the drivers in the media center and then like on the grid before and after races, which was really cool. It was a great experience because I feel like that helped me when I got to documentaries, because you learn to ask questions in situations that you don't really want to ask questions sometimes. And plus in media centers, you're in a room and there's a lot of people there who might just judge you when you ask questions in general. So that was really good practice for me. But I wanted to do films, so I was going really out of my way to learn how to do it. And NASCAR was so awesome to me, and really a lot of people that were there. When I was younger, I was probably 24, 25-ish. They had something in the off season where they brought in these guys from an old website called lynda.com, and they taught a lot of After Effects and all this stuff. So they offered that course for free, and I was like one of the only people who signed up. And it was like an all-inclusive class for like a week. And so I was like I said, one of the only people there. So I got a lot of attention, and I really learned how to do pretty heavy After Effects within like a week. And I tried doing After Effects for years before that, and I couldn't figure it out. And then I seriously think that week was I remember walking home and I'm like, I think I figured something pretty big out like this week. And I started utilizing it towards some broadcast opens, because at that time I was starting to get some opportunities to start working on those. And it just kind of propelled me forward. Those opens for broadcast turned into trailers for documentaries because NASCAR made those. And then that turned into, okay, we're going to put you on some features, to, oh, we're going to have you start working on these documentaries, editing segments, to, oh, we're going to have you direct these. And the coolest part is that's when I met my business partner, Jeff. We started working together about, 8 years ago. And we were working on those films together, and it was kind of cool because he was coming up the same time I was. And we just work really well together. He's so good at a certain type of, he's really good at a certain type of thing, and I'm really good at another type of thing. And when we edit, it works. So it was funny how it all worked out. But yeah, I would say my first real films kind of started happening while I was at NASCAR. And it was something that kind of naturally evolved into being the case, because I wanted to make films. I just didn't know how to make like something that was proper, that was actually going to be on a broadcast that people would sit down, and watch on like a random night or something like that. So it was cool. And it was cool. Then, I did one, and then it turned into several. And then ultimately, Jeff and I branched off 2 years ago, and we've been doing some since then as well. So, yeah, it's just been crazy. And I'm sorry, I'm just
basically you got a job at NASCAR, and that was kind of like your news reporting anchor type. Oh, probably not an anchor, but like you're out there reporting on races, and you were able to like. Did you study, like you mentioned, you studied how to become a news reporter?
I was studying in college, I was studying electronic media, but that was to become either basically a TV anchor or a news reporter. And like I said, when I was in college, I had quite a few internships in college, which I was fortunate about. I worked at a PR firm because that was my other, major as well. But news was kind of what I was really going to go into. And I'm glad I had these internships in PR and news prior to graduating, because it kind of taught me like, okay, this is awesome, but I don't know if it's fully for me. I was always more into what I always wanted to do, which was, make films. I always wanted to work for NASCAR when I was a kid. That was my actual dream job as a kid, along with making films. So I consider myself very lucky to have been given that opportunity to go then do that for years. And then obviously your dreams change, and it became more film centric, which was another dream of mine. And that's kind of what I'm doing more of now. So especially with our company, but yeah, so I got hired by NASCAR initially to in their news department. And then by learning After Effects and all that, I kind of got attention more from the production side. And then I switched departments, and then kind of started not necessarily from the bottom, but kind of at a lower tier position in that, and then worked my way all the way up, and then started making a lot of films there, especially the last 5 years I was at NASCAR. When
you work in news or broadcasting news, it's very fast paced in terms of you got to film the story and get it out like the next day. Was that a good experience in learning like, how to kind of finish a project, even if it's like a small, like little news piece, to kind of get your head around, all right, what pieces do I need? What questions should I ask in order to have enough like content to put into this news story? And like the time frames involved, like do you go out to an event and kind of you have to get these little pieces and then put it out the next day or the same day, like that kind of thing?
Yeah, I find it highly beneficial that that's what I studied when I was in school. And I'm still really close to my professors from college, because I actually credit them a lot for getting me where I am. For a lot of reasons, I still go to them for advice to this day, because I went to a smaller college called Wartburg College in Northeast Iowa. And it was great for me because learning that whole, like you said, everything's fast in the news industry. And ironically, in the sports world, it's pretty fast too. I feel like you still have to move pretty quick, but it's not quite as fast as what news was. But like I would get these artsy kind of features that I would have to do every week with Jeff called Radioactive for a while, which were kind of these kind of more in-depth features about the races with, through the scanner. But then, we'd have like Alexa minis and all that stuff around the track that we'd film with. And then Jeff and I would then be responsible for packaging that together and then telling the story of the race. And we'd have like, 48 hours to do it. So, and they'd have to be like 8 minutes. So that was something I was really happy I was in news with before, because you have to kind of look at it from two perspectives. One, like the story perspective, almost a journalistic perspective, because the story is factual. And that's also like documentaries. You are doing a lot of journalism when you're doing documentaries, but you're telling it from kind of an artistic approach, with how you shoot it and all this stuff, but everything is factual. So I'm really happy I learned that and learned how to move quickly. But then also, one thing that was nice when I got to NASCAR and kind of easing into what I'm doing now, and even my time at Menards, was then learning how to do the really kind of heavy production side of things. And then kind of finding a way to blend those two was nice, but I think news really has helped me a lot. And I do not regret studying journalism or any of that kind of stuff when I was in college, because I do think it's benefited me so much in my career, especially with documentaries, like without question.
Yeah. And you mentioned something about like you have to have like the factual to get all the facts right, especially in sports. Like everyone's all about the numbers and the statistics and like who is who, and you really have to know about the sport that you're trying to tell the story about. Like there's not as much like artistic freedom when it comes to like statistics and things like that, but you're able to play around with the images and like the music and make it emotional, but you still have to make sure that all the facts are right, because then if you get something wrong, that someone's going to pull you up on it. Yeah.
Well, that was what was nuts is like, when we were doing the follow docs, I've done a couple follow documentaries, and you're editing those in like real time as they're going for, a network or something. And I remember watching, you're like, man, it would be so nice if this happened, because this would be a great storyline. And then, you really can't plan for anything. You have to have multiple plans. So you almost have different scenarios written out in your head for like, okay, if this happens, I got to do this. If this happens, I got to do this, because it's the only way you really can plan, because you're going off of what's actually happening. So it's just, you'll watch, the race, the sporting event, whatever it might be. And something happens and you're like, okay, I have to start thinking right now, how am I going to do that? Because that just happened. I have to cover it. Because it's what happened. It's the facts. And you just have to find the best way to do it. So that's, again, where that journalistic approach really comes in nicely, because it's like, okay, I got it. And then you then bring in what you've learned through production and film and all that stuff, and then combine the two. It's really not, it's a nice combination if you get it right. And sometimes, I don't do it right, but that's where it's nice to have Jeff. So he'll come in and he'll fix it for me sometimes, just because we're moving so quick. But it's something, I'm always learning. I'm not a master at this stuff by any means, but I'm just grateful for what I've learned and what I continue to learn, and I think it helps a lot.
Yeah, and it is kind of like tricky, like you said, to pick the right storyline or have the right character, because, you know, they might not win, but somebody else win. Oh, I should have followed that guy, but it's a bit late. But yeah, each storyline is its own kind of, you know, has its own thing to tell, and like there is the integrity as well of like filming, covering the story, even if something bad happens, like a crash or something, like you still have to keep the camera rolling to try and capture that drama. Like some people will be like, stop recording, like, but you kind of like, you know, that's part of the job, is you have to kind of film it all.
It's a constant audible, you know. There was one film I was doing about a sprint car racer who's a girl, and she races out in Iowa. We've actually become really good friends. And she's a phenomenal sprint car racer. But we were out at a race with her, and she's just, I mean, she's so talented. You watch her go around the track and she's making great moves. And she got involved in a wreck that really wasn't her fault at all. She just got tangled up in it. And we had in-car footage of it. And I mean, I remember when she crashed, we were all horrified. Like, oh no, like what happened? She ended up being okay. And, you know, at first we were there and we wanted to just get footage of her racing, passing people, but we audibled a little bit because we weren't able to get as much racing footage as we thought we would get that night. But it really helped the film because it showed how tough she was. You know, we had this in-car footage of her flipping, and it's really violent, but it helped the story a lot because that's what the story was, you know. It's just, I feel like documentary filmmaking is really a lot of just not trying too hard to make it something that it's not. It's really just letting the project be what it is, and then just using the resources to best explain the story that is, you know. So many times, like, people overthink everything. With documentary filmmaking, it's like, just let the story be what it is and use everything you have resource wise to complement the facts, you know. And let that, you know, if it's an artistic approach, great, cool. If you want to shoot it a certain way and it can be basic, cool, doesn't matter. Just do it in a way that stays true to what the story is. And I feel like you find success in that no matter what, you know? So it's documentary is facts, and that's what people want to see.
Yeah, because I think where people go wrong, like especially with like reality shows or reality TV, is they try to manufacture things too much. But like if it is like a real sport, like car racing or like football or whatever, like you can't really fake that. Like whereas like wrestling and stuff, you know, obviously they manufacture storylines and it's entertainment, but it's not real, unfortunately. But
it's just not, at the end of the day, it's not our job to tell an athlete or, you know, whoever we're doing a doc on, whether it's an athlete or not, like what their story is, you know. Like it's not our story, it's their story. You know, Jeff and I just did a narrative for the first time together. I've done a narrative when I was younger, and it was okay. I learned a lot from it, but you know, it was definitely different because it was like, okay, I'm actually kind of in charge of this, which was a different element. But you know, when you're doing documentaries, it's kind of cool when you just have a story that you work with, and whatever the personality is, you know. Like say there's a real sentimental side to the individual. It's like, okay, well, let's explore that a little bit. Tell me a little bit more about that. Ask them some questions to kind of find out maybe a story about that you can share with the audience, so then people can relate to this character a little more. But again, it's just like totally factual. Whereas when you're doing a narrative, it's like, well, I have to come up with all that. It's kind of wild. And when I really think about it, sometimes some of these stories that we're doing for documentaries, it's crazy sometimes to think like, oh my gosh, this is actually real. You know, like you have to pinch yourself sometimes and be like, I'm standing here and this is actually happening. This is wild. So yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry for going off on a tangent, but yeah.
it's so good. Yeah, it's a matter of like exploring different avenues, and the same with this. It's just like talking and figuring out and like thinking about it, like because you probably don't really have the time to like think back and be like, oh, that's why it happened. You know, you kind of, you know, so many projects they keep coming, and And yeah, it takes time to like stop and reflect and think, oh, how did I kind of get to this point? So that's the idea, is just to kind of figure out, you know, how you did what you've done, and the kind of thought process behind it. And I like the idea, like the journalistic, the integrity, and trying to keep the stories true to the characters, and like even like fitting each story within that realm, because, you know, if you put on a certain cover a certain sport, there's already an audience there that like is attracted to it, and you have to kind of fit in with what they are liking in terms of the tone of it and the style.
Yeah, and I you know, I just feel like too, like you, especially when you're doing certain stories, like you almost feel like a pretty heavy responsibility to just do a justice to the story, and the person that you're working with on this, who is the subject of the story. You know, you want to make them proud sometimes too. You know, there's some really difficult conversations you have to have when you're doing these with questions. You know, you talk about some very hard subjects that you don't really just even have conversations with when you're talking to your friends. You know, these are things that you wouldn't ask a stranger normally. So you have people spilling their heart out to you. You know, whether it be a tragic thing, whether it be something that you know, they can't, let's say there's a game or a race or something they can't win for some reason, and they're just really angry about it. They're telling you all this stuff. And so I feel a huge responsibility, and Jeff feels a big responsibility when we're doing these, to, you know, tell the story as true as we can, as true to the story as we can, get to the facts through all the interviews that we can, and tell it to, you know, make these people proud. You know, I'm proud to say I stay in touch with a lot of the people that we do these films about. We tend to do a little bit more of the inspirational type stories, but you know, sometimes they're not. But even then, it's just important. You know, journalistic integrity is everything, and I'm glad I learned that at a young age. So yeah.
So how, like, take us through kind of like the process of how you kind of set up an interview, or like the questions that you have asked. Like, how do you kind of prep them? Like, what kind of setup do you have in terms of like a camera and lighting, and like everything's kind of organized beforehand, and then you kind of go through a list of questions? And do you have like a plan of like, let's start off like with easy questions and then bring the hard ones in, like they might get sad at this point? Like, what's the kind of, yeah, like that kind of process of interviewing like somebody?
Yeah, I would say, you know, it's funny because when Jeff and I do interviews, we tend to co-direct a lot of what we do. And there's certain types of individuals, after we get, you know, vibes from them in like pre-interviews. I tend to do pre-interviews as much as I can. Sometimes it's not an option. You just have 1 minute that you can talk to them beforehand, and that's it. But oftentimes we do get the opportunity to just have like a phone conversation before, just to kind of get to know the person a little bit and get a vibe for what their personality is. I'm a little bit more outgoing and this, that, and the other. And I'll kind of find people that are more my type of, I don't know. Jeff and I just interview based on who we think would be better to interview that specific person. But to prep for it, the pre-interviews are so helpful. I mean, when you're sitting there and you're talking to them on the phone, you kind of start to find out through these conversations, okay, I didn't know this. I'm going to ask them about this in the interview, and then have them go into depth on it a little bit more. You know, there's just certain things that you find out in those pre-interviews that you would not have found out just by doing research on the internet or from hearing other interviews, because it's not coming from the actual subject. So I think the pre-interviews are always super helpful. It also allows, sometimes if you are going to have some difficult questions that you might be planning on asking, out of respect for the people that I'm going to interview, I tend to give them a little bit of a heads up. Like, would you be okay if I went this route in talking to you about this? I don't necessarily give them specifics, because I don't want them to then kind of spoil the actual response when the cameras are rolling. because I want the viewers to actually see that so they can fully be engulfed by the story. But I do like to give them a heads up because I think everyone deserves to know. I don't like making people uncomfortable. I want people to feel comfortable talking to me. And the main thing is you're just having a very comfortable conversation. With that comes the integrity thing again. You know, there's different routes you can go with documentaries. And it's just, I try to be, as honest as I can when doing these things. So I want the subjects to feel that way as well. And I want them to feel comfortable. So we kind of just plan accordingly. And like you said, like there's some certain questions you start with. Like I do think it's important to kind of start off with some easier questions to ease into it. And then as you get further along, then you can kind of go off the deep end a little bit and ask like specifics about, fill in the blank that may be more difficult to talk about. If you ease into it, it's a little easier to get a better response rather than just hitting off the bat with that from the get-go. You don't want to start off with hard questions because then it's like, where's this interview going to go? And then if they didn't answer it right in their own mind, they're going to be thinking about it the rest of the time. And then you're not going to get good responses and all the other stuff you need. So, yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good because, some people, like whether it be like an athlete or like a celebrity, like they're always kind of scrutinized in like the gossips magazines and stuff. So you kind of have to do a bit of research, I guess, to make sure that you don't ask, the wrong question or upset them, because that could throw off, like you said, could throw off everything and it might leave a bad taste in their mouth, and then they might go and talk to other people and it might like jeopardize other projects as well. So I guess it's a tightrope in terms of having to figure out your questions.
Yeah. And I do feel like people, if they know you did your research, I think they tend to feel like, I think they'll respect you more and give you a better answer because they'll know like, okay, this person actually did their research. They know my story or the story that is being covered. And I'm comfortable answering this. It's kind of a respect thing. It's like, I did the work to learn this. And so me asking you about it, I feel like they tend to respond better to that.
Yeah. And you mentioned early on, like you were talking, like doing interviews maybe in front of other people in the press. So they're kind of critiquing your question as well.
I mean, I've had, I've had some responses, especially I would say even more than the media center is when you're interviewing athletes right after a game or a race or whatever, and they lost, or they crashed. I feel like that's more of a hot seat situation than you can ever be in because they're upset and you have to ask them what happened. And sometimes they don't want to talk about it and they might say something really mean to you. And you don't get those responses usually when you're doing, at least when I've done documentaries, I tend to not get that kind of response because the adrenaline's not going quite as much from these athletes. But you don't ask anything that you shouldn't ask when they crash or something like that, but they just don't want to talk about it because they're really mad. But I learned how to kind of read people before asking things when doing that, just because I was so young. It was really good for me to absorb that at a young age. I remember being like, oh no, I got to go interview this guy right now. And I know this type of personality that I'm about to interview, and he's not going to be happy because this happened in the race or this happened in the game, but you just have to go do it. And I'm glad I did those because I think it really prepared me for kind of almost awkward situations when you're in interviews, because it's never going to be as bad as it is during those moments. There's some really emotional interviews you have to do, but it's a little different when someone's really genuinely like upset about whatever situation they're in and they're really, everything's going, they're not thinking straight. People just say some really mean things sometimes. So I don't know. After being through that, I feel like it made me a little more confident in the interviewer's chair than I think I would have been if I didn't go through that. So yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen like other kind of colleagues or other journalists like say the wrong thing, like ask a silly question, and everybody else kind of groans like, oh, and you kind of like, oh, you take note. Yeah.
I have sympathy for him because everyone at some point gets one of those comments of like, oh man, like, you know, you don't, sometimes you don't want to ask it either, but you kind of have to, because either you got someone telling you got to go ask them this question, or you know, this, that, and the other, and it's just uncomfortable. But you know, it's never anything bad because it's about a sporting event. It's not like you're digging for anything really. It's just, you're just trying to ask them what happened. You know, I was fortunate. I was never like on a network. I was just doing stuff that was going to go to, you know, NASCAR.com after. So if it didn't go well, we didn't have to post it, you know, that or the other. But because sometimes they just wouldn't talk. But I don't know. It was yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy going through that. So I don't know. I recommend to go through something like that, but also it's kind of horrifying too.
But well, it's a good training ground, I guess, to kind of figure out in terms of like the social setting of what is an appropriate question, and what kind of like pitfalls there are in terms of if you ask the wrong question, like especially in a group of people, like you can kind of like, just like watching a film with an audience, you can kind of tell when people laugh or clap, or whereas if you're watching it by yourself, you don't get those like social cues.
100%. I mean, and the one thing too is like media days, you know, going through those and seeing, you know, like how people respond when they have to go through and just answer questions to people all day. Media days, for people who aren't really familiar, it's like going into a season for fill in the blank sport. Usually they bring in a bunch of the top athletes, and then they go around and they answer a bunch of questions. Oftentimes it's the same questions over and over and over and over again. So you have to find a way to present it to them to get somewhat of a different answer, you know? So it's just, I feel like you have to be, I have such respect for live reporters and reporters in general, because I do feel like after having gone through that for just a very short period of time in my career, you have to be so creative on the spot with how you ask questions. And you really have to look for those visual cues to understand how someone is responding to something, and how to think quick too. Like, oh, this isn't going to go the right way. Maybe we should ask something else, you know? So I tend to look at people's emotions when I'm interviewing them. I have a list of things that I'm going to ask them, but I think because I was a journalist, if I see something going a certain way, and I know Jeff's the same way, we will gladly go down another road. Like if it's like, okay, here's something that just came up, I'm going to ask them this. So rather than just asking questions off of a sheet going, okay, so tell me about this, and then like look up, you know, tell me about this, then look up and then see the response. It's actually having that conversation, which, you know, I feel like then from the live reporting, that's how you get more of a genuine answer, you know, rather than just, you know, because when you're live reporting and you're in the moment, you're not going, so tell me real quick on lap so-and-so, this happened. No, you have to just go off of memory, you know? So it's really finding that conversation point and finding which way to go. Because if you're having a conversation with someone and it's not going well, you're not going to keep asking that question because they're going to get up and leave, you know? So I've never had anyone leave during an interview on a documentary yet, but I hope that day never happens. But I try my best to kind of read the room, if you will, so that doesn't happen.
Yeah, because like especially with athletes or like celebrities, they always get the same questions, and sometimes they like it because they can just use their cued response, like their little like go-to story or their, you know, script. But as a journalist or like a filmmaker, you're going to get the same answer everybody else has. So it's kind of like, okay, how can I get them talking to say something that is beyond what everyone else has? How can I like get past the PR stuff, like what the publicist tells them to say, and get into like further what they really think without, you know.
Yeah, like how do I get past the feeling of the cameras are in the room, right?
Yeah.
Once you get past that, then you start having a real conversation. Well, sometimes, you know, when you know the camera's rolling, especially from the athlete standpoint, I know I totally feel for them because they're having to answer a lot of questions. They've gone through a lot of training too, which is good for them because it's a lot of PR reasons. But when you're doing a documentary about a deep dive into their personality, you don't want that. So it is very important to find and get to that conversational point, because if you aren't able to get to that, you're going to get those same answers. So you're not going to get a response that you haven't heard before from, fill in the blank athlete or fill in the blank celebrity, because they've already said it, because they've, that's what they're used to saying when the camera's rolling. So you got to get that conversation going as if the camera's not rolling. So it's kind of hard to get to. And I'm not saying I'm a master at it by any means. I actually learned a lot of this from Jeff, because Jeff is really good. I've never met anyone who can do an interview during a documentary who can let a room be quiet as long as Jeff can. Like, he'll do an interview, and he taught me this, and I've picked it up from him a little bit, but pausing and just letting them go. Because when you and I are talking, sometimes just naturally as a human, you're like, well, I don't want it to be awkward, so I'm just going to say a word here. Like, after you might be asking them something difficult, and then you just kind of go, oh, I'm sorry for asking. Don't say anything. Just sit there and let them tell, because they're processing, and sometimes that's the best stuff you get on camera, is you ask them a question, and then if it's a hard question, you just sit there and sit for 15 seconds. And it's weird. I mean, I'm telling you, I've been in those rooms, and watching Jeff do it the first few times, I'm like, I gotta leave, But what I found, and I watched him do this about 7 years ago for the first time, and then I started doing it, and then I noticed, oh, this is good, So it's best to do what I'm doing right now is not what I would do during an interview. I'm talking way too much. But when you're interviewing someone, talk and let them tell you everything. Because the more you talk, the less they're going to say. But you have to find it within that conversational point. So it has to still feel like a conversation, but you have to find times to just sit quiet for 15 seconds, So that's just something, and there's a lot of ways you can do it, but that's something, Jeff, I learned from him, and I think it's brilliant, because we've gotten some of the best stuff we've had for just sitting there and just leaving the room awkwardly silent to everyone else in the room, but to the subject, it's perfect, and it helps them a lot too, because I think once it comes across on camera, it looks better because you're allowing them to actually say what they're thinking. And I would say, I mean, there are a lot of journalists who do that too. When I was a journalist, I did not do that, and I'm a very novice journalist. Like, I'm not trying to say like, oh, I'm an expert. I'm not. I studied it in college. Really had like 2 years professionally with it, I would say, tops. But when I was doing that, there was a lot of fast-paced stuff, just asking questions. I never had to ask some really sad question to someone about some family tragedy that they never talk about. That's something you don't want to ask in a media center, or, rarely in a media center. I don't really know why you would want to do that ever. But, that's something you usually do in kind of a closed setting, like a documentary, interview. So I had to learn a lot. Just, there are so many similarities, but there is a little bit of differences. It's a much more personal interview, and they're willing to actually kind of talk to you about stuff more in those situations. It's just different. So,
and when it comes to editing, like, okay, I can play around with time. So it's like, there is no like deadline, like, oh, we got to cut back to the newsroom in 5 seconds. So it's like, just let them talk, let them just leave that silence. And it gives a whole new, like you said, a new tone, new feeling. It doesn't feel like you're rushing them, like, come on, get the answer out.
Time, I mean, obviously people have schedules that you're interviewing a lot of the times, but we tend to try to throw time out the window when we're doing our interviews. Like, you got to be aware of it a little bit, but for the sake of the interview, it is important to kind of forget about it for a little bit and just, time doesn't matter right now. We're having this conversation and you're telling me a story, and I want you to tell it, and allowing them to have that time. Because sometimes people it's surprising sometimes how much more people want to actually tell you. And if you're interrupting them, it's going to hurt the documentary, So, because that's something that the viewer can learn, about this person, or, it just could be a whole new story topic that comes up that you might learn to go ask someone else. So there's just a lot of different things, you know?
Yeah, because like as a filmmaker or a, you know, reporter or journalist, a lot of the times they try to, like we were talking about before, like skewer the story into what they want it to be, what they think's right. Whereas, yeah, if you want the true story, you have to kind of just shut up and listen and like stop interrupting and then make them decide and make them tell you the story that they want to tell rather than trying to dictate everything.
Well, and that's that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Like, instead of trying so hard to make this like insane, like Martin Scorsese type documentary, you know, just let the story be what it is and work with what you have. You know, that's great. Okay, cool. You have an awesome story right here. Well, maybe you don't have footage for it. We'll make a really cool reenactment. You know, make the reenactment really artsy. Do something like that, but do not interfere with what the story is, because whatever they're going to tell you that is actually truthful is so beautiful when it's on screen. And it's something that, like, it could be about anything, but if it's the truth, man, it is like, it just sings on the screen when it's like a really just completely like heartfelt story, because you let the subject talk and tell it and not interrupt them and try to, you know, throw in something that doesn't matter, you know. It interrupts the story.
Some of the worst documentaries are the ones that are about like the journalist or whoever, the narrator, kind of taking the story about this person, and then they spend like 5 minutes talking about themselves, and it's like, we don't care about you, like, go back. Yeah,
there's only a couple people I've seen before that that have done that and have done an exceptional job, and it was actually like intentional, because they might be working on a story and then something got so far off the rails that they had to then insert themselves and say, look, we were making a doc about this and we had to actually change the entire subject. It still involves this person, but it went this route. I watched it was actually one of the best. It's one of the like best short films I've ever watched. It's a sports thing. And I can't remember the title of it, but it was made by this awesome documentarian called Todd. His name's Todd Kapp. And any one of his short films are awesome. His documentaries are great too. But he did something once about like a runner. And he was following this runner who was trying to break this record about like running across the country or something along those lines. And it turned out that, like, while they were following him, they found out, oh my gosh, this guy's actually cheating. He's actually like just kind of hanging out on the back of the truck at night and just riding along and not actually putting the miles in, you know, because he was running at night, but really was hanging on. So he then inserted himself in to talk about it. But it was beautiful how he did it, because that was necessary. But a lot of times what you see for other stuff, it's not necessary when you see people just kind of insert themselves in, unless there's a reason for it. And you want to talk about a guy too who does a good job of getting the story out and then using the artistic side to film it. That guy, he's outstanding.
What about like camera equipment and stuff? Are you into that kind of thing, like using different rigs and cameras and lenses and all that?
Yeah, I love trying different stuff. Commercials are pretty cool. We do a lot of TV commercials as well, so it's awesome to try out some new types of equipment during that, whether it be some new lenses, because you can be really artistic during those. And I learn a lot doing TV commercials, and like kind of, I still do a lot of opens and trailers. I learn a lot doing those, especially, and then I use those a lot. Sorry, I'm gonna start over. I learn a lot doing like TV trailer, I learn a lot doing movie trailer type stuff, as well as like commercials. And then I can then utilize what I learned from that and then incorporate it into my documentaries after we get the entire story laid out, especially through like reenactments. We did, we own an Alexa Mini, so we utilize that a lot. We have a DP that we work with all the time named Joseph Beckham, who is awesome. If you're ever looking for a DP, you should hire him. Joe Beck, he lives out here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I'm from. But we've used him a lot, and we have this really good relationship with him where we kind of try different things out. And he'll recommend like, hey, maybe we try this out for this commercial or for this doc. What if we shoot the interviews like this rather than this? You know, I remember a couple of years ago, we decided to start doing some iDirect stuff, which was kind of different then, which now a lot of people do iDirect, but just kind of staying up with like what's in style, but also kind of a timeless look. So even some of the stuff we have that we've worked on recently, we've kind of tried filming those a little different. You know, you don't want things to stay the same. You know, just trying some different styles out might help people relate to the story a little more than otherwise, you know. And again, oftentimes we shoot the interviews based on how and light the room based on like what the pre-interviews were like with the subject that we're going to interview. So if I'm getting a certain like, you know, tone from them, I'll talk to our DP and we'll kind of try to set up the room based on how the pre-interviews went, you know, to then help the visuals express what they're saying, you know. It just helps tell the story a little bit better. But yeah, we try a lot of different things. I mean, we're always trying different lenses. We just filmed with like an F-22 crane, which was really cool. It's something they use sometimes to rig up on like camera cars. But just even utilizing it is almost like this really cool steady cam that you can kind of just weave through things and through objects and still follow the subject. They're great for reenactments. They're great for narratives too, or commercials. Probably even better for that, to be honest. But yeah, we're always trying new stuff out, new ways to tell these different stories or documentaries or commercials the best way possible.
And then in terms of like using archival footage, like what's the process like in that? I'm sure it's hard to kind of find certain shots, or like if you're doing like a sports thing, for example, for NASCAR, they probably have a big library that you kind of search, or how do you like find like a certain driver winning a race or something? Like there's a lot of history books, I guess, to kind of figure out. And what's that process like?
Yeah, so it's fun. I'm glad you brought that up because it's another reason I'm really glad I worked in sports as long as I did, especially NASCAR, because you learn about the archival process and what that looks like. Because oftentimes the leagues will own the footage that you're trying to get, especially the archival stuff from something. Like say you're covering something from, you know, Dale Earnhardt in his rookie year in 1979. You want footage of it. Well, you've got to go through NASCAR for it because they own all that footage. It's you know, anything that's within the track at NASCAR, they contractually like have access to it for a certain number of years. So you have to go through them. It helps, especially, you know, usually that's why anytime I do like a NASCAR doc or something, usually NASCAR is always involved, usually, especially when it's NASCAR related. When I was on staff, it was obviously a NASCAR doc because I worked there. And then, you know, being freelance, I'm working on some NASCAR stuff right now too. It tends to be NASCAR is they have a huge involvement in it. Same with like NFL. NFL Films is involved in most of what the NFL does, if not all of it, I would say. So you have to go through the right you have to go through the right avenues for that stuff. Otherwise you can run into some serious trouble. And it's important to plan for that before you actually make the doc and find out, like, can I actually get access to this? Because if you can't, I mean, you may be wasting your time. And if you can't get access to it, but you still want to make the doc, you got to find another way to do it. So that sometimes involves reenactments, that involves photos. You know, there are situations before that we've been in where we couldn't use footage of something because they're talking about a certain thing in a documentary, but we could use a photo. And with that, like, you know, you just have to get creative. Like, maybe I animate this photo. Like, there's different ways of doing that now. Maybe I just keep it still or something. Like, there's just a lot of ways. I mean, it tests you for sure. You have to find a lot of different ways to tell the story, you know. But having the archival footage is key. So finding the best avenue to get to that oftentimes the leagues own it, especially in sports. If it's an entertainment avenue, you have to find who owns it. You know, I did there's a film we did called Golden Hour, Making of Days of Thunder. There's a Tom Cruise film that came out early 90s. It was like 1990, I believe. And when we were doing that film, you know, we had access a lot of behind the scenes footage because NASCAR shot a lot of it, but we also needed to get a lot of the footage from the actual movie. So we had to go through Paramount Pictures to get that footage. And so, you know, you can't just use anything, especially when it airs on TV and it's like a documentary you're making that you're going to sell advertising with. Like, you've got to involve the right channels. So it's always important to make sure your ducks are in a row. I always recommend getting some type of like an entertainment lawyer to work with when you're doing these things, especially independently. You just don't want to cross the wrong path and get in trouble. And you want to do it the right way too.
Do you get like a professional, like an archivist person that can kind of track down the footage, or?
You can give them an idea of what you want. Like, YouTube's great because you can always look on there, and oftentimes they own the footage. So you can be like, oh, can you kind of try to find something like this that you might have? And they might even know where that actual shot is. But oftentimes when you work with like a sports league or, you know, something like that, or whoever owns the footage, they tend to have like someone who runs like the library who knows where everything is, or at least can get to something that you want. You work with them and try to find the footage. And depending on what the contract is with whoever you're working with, you know, it may be per shot that you're paying for, or it may just be a kind of a blanket contract that you can use for a certain amount of footage or something like that, rather than just clip by clip. But oftentimes you tend to work with like one of the archivists who's on staff and ask them questions, because sometimes you're surprised what's there. And you try to dig with them. You also can hire people to dig for you online and try to find stuff, kind of more as like assistant editors, which I've been in that situation before as well, with actually a baseball documentary I did. And they were able to find and collect some great stuff just from their findings online. And we then would go to the proper channels. Oftentimes it was a league. It was like MLB, and we'd ask, hey, where is this? If they didn't have it, we go to the network. And then sometimes it would be an entertainment avenue, so we'd have to go there and ask them. And sometimes you'd be surprised too. Like, some people just own it that you wouldn't expect would own it. You know, it's like some guy out in Cleveland owns it, and he's not really associated with anything. He's just a guy, and he owns a bunch of footage, and it's his, and you got to pay that guy. Or sometimes people will just give it to you. So, for example, when I'm doing like some of the documentaries that are pretty intense stories, but it's not someone who's like in the majors or anything like that. Like, if I did like a sprint car racer, sometimes people will have footage to it that will just, you'll reach out, hey, can I have this for this film? They'll sometimes just give it to you, which is very generous of them, but they want to be a part of the story. And then, you know, you just try to credit them at the end. But yeah, there's just a lot of things. You've really got to make sure your ducks are in a row with that. That's why it's important to have someone on your side who's just kind of keeping track of like, okay, what's this? Or you need to be really cautious when you're going through and like mark like, okay, this is something I got from here. We need to get this cleared. If you can't, you got to have a backup plan.
Yeah, because I know there's lawyers that are looking for that kind of stuff. That's what their main job is, to sue people for using footage. But I know the footage is sometimes super expensive. Like, if you want a shot from the Late Show from 1960s, and they charge like $1,000 a second or something sometimes. So it's like, how can I get 2 seconds? Oh, that's not even worth getting, you know?
There. We actually were showing something from Saturday Night Live once, because one of the people we were interviewing was like a host of Saturday Night Live, hearing a certain story. And I think the footage was pretty pricey, so we actually ended up just using a photo that we were allowed to use through like Getty or something that we got cleared, because it was way cheaper, and we got a couple photos, and we were able to just make those couple photos work, because it didn't really we didn't need to actually show them on Saturday Night Live. acting. We just needed to be able to show that they were on Saturday Night Live somehow, you know? So like the photos did a justice on that.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be spending too much time just editing footage that you get from YouTube, putting together this great montage, and then you realize it's going to cost $100,000 to put together. It's like,
that's happened to me a few times. Like I would say almost every project I work on, a lot of times you run into it through music, because I utilize a company, and I stand by them big time because they've been great to me over my career. But there's a company called APM. I don't know if you've ever heard of them before. They're awesome. They actually do a lot of TV shows use their music. It's mind-boggling that it's even like royalty-free type music, because you listen to it, and it's actually like incredible artists making these awesome songs that I would even listen to on the radio. And like stuff that's, the soundtracks are so good, you're like, what movie was this from? But I mean, I've worked with real composers before, and that is just an absolute gift. But sometimes you don't get that. So you have to go through APM or something like that. And APM's great because you get kind of a contract per, you can either do per song, or you can do kind of like I was talking about, like a blanket contract with them, either long-term for several projects or just per project. And that's a great route to go. But oftentimes, you want to try to get a popular song, because popular songs sometimes will be cheaper than you think they are to utilize. But, sometimes you insert it into the project, and then you find out the band, they don't do that kind of thing. And then you got to get it out, and you got to re-edit to some new type of song, which, if you're an editor of any kind, switching out music is not always the easiest thing to do. But it's just part of the deal. It's what you sign up for. And I think every documentary I've worked on, there's always some big major change that you just have to deal with at some point. And sometimes it usually has to do with clearances. It's like, we couldn't get this. Because, again, you're not filming a movie that's a narrative. It's not a script. So you're going off of facts. And when you're going off of facts, that's the story, and you got to find a way to tell it. And sometimes telling it with the actual footage is the best way to do it. But sometimes you can't get that footage. So it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, because I know, temp music is kind of difficult especially if you get attached to it, or you show somebody else and then they expect that's going to be the music, and then it's just like a Hans Zimmer. It's like, we can't use that. It's going to cost too much.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's the thing. Like, temp music. I've done temp music before. And temp music is pretty good sometimes. I don't know. I like temp music, and then I don't, especially when you're working with a composer, because I don't want the composer to get the wrong idea of what it's supposed to be. If you're working with someone who's a really advanced composer, they might see that, and then you can they'll have a conversation with you oftentimes, like, hey, I kind of see the theme of the music more like this. What do you think? And here's my reasoning. I'm a pretty open-ended director, and so is Jeff. We like working with people, and we like hearing their ideas, rather than trying to tell them exactly what it's supposed to be, because we like kind of guiding the ship. But with that, like, I am not an expert in music. I can kind of play the drums, but I'm not going to make something that's going to make you cry musically. I'm just not. And I don't have a good singing voice. So, I'm not Celine Dion, if you will. But I worked with a composer a lot of the time named Stephen Dewar, and he is outstanding. And he'll, the narrative short we just did, called The Jukebox, which has not come out yet. When we were working on that with him, I had some temp music in there, and he actually listened to it and was like, what do you think if I tried this? And I let him go with it. And, to my surprise, but yet not my surprise, because he's always coming up with great music, he really helped create a culture for the film that was really nice, based on just what he was seeing and what we were trying to express. He was able to kind of find it and find that sound that we weren't really even able to find with temp music. But in other parts, temp music is good, because it's like, oh, I know what you're trying to go with here, I'm going to go with it. But so there's benefits and negatives to Temp music,
Yeah.
without question.
What is like one of the first projects that you kind of worked on that you'd like to talk about a little bit?
Yeah, I would say the first like big project I worked on that I was like, oh man, this actually turned out really well. It was a much more simplistic documentary compared to some of the other stuff I do, but it was called Refuse to Lose. And by being simplistic, I'm not dissing it at all. It's actually, I love it. I still like would watch it again. It was cool for me because that entire documentary revolves around Jeff Gordon in the 90s. 1997, going into that season, he hadn't won a Daytona 500 before. Ray Evernham, his crew chief at the time, who I actually work with on some projects still this day, I actually saw him just like a week ago. He had compiled a bunch of footage during that time, like VHS tapes, had a bunch of people following the team behind the scenes. So it's essentially like Hard Knocks before Hard Knocks was a thing. They were going to utilize the footage for like, they didn't really know what, like some type of hype video, Christmas party thing. But they followed the team leading up to the Daytona 500 because Ray had a good feeling like this might be our year, which is, I mean, it's crazy that it worked because like, you know, Daytona 500s are very hard to win because it's restrictor plate type racing and anyone can win those. But I'm giving away the whole thing here. But, you know, going into it, it was so cool because there was all this behind the scenes footage of basically what I was following in my childhood. And you're seeing them build the car and like, you know, so it's the 24 car. And, you know, Ray's going to the track and you see him go through inspection and kind of negotiating with the officials like, oh, no, you know, work with me here. And then like how he manipulated certain parts of the car so they didn't see the other side of the car. It was such a fun doc to edit. And Jeff and I got the opportunity to edit and produce that. And I remember that coming out and I was just like, man, that was really cool. And I was like 26 or so at the time. So this is like 7 years ago. I had done a few docs before then. I did a docuseries called 100,000 Cameras before then, which was kind of like a social and film following around the Daytona 500. But this like one that came out in 2017 was really cool and it was special. And I remember it was like I think it was like 150 hours of footage Ray had going into it. And I got to go through all of it and like find my favorite footage and like pick it. And then we kind of asked questions. It was a small team of us too. I mean, it was me, my business partner, Jeff, and then this other individual named Griffin Van Malsen, who I've worked with at NASCAR for a while. Awesome guy, big movie guy, big into movies. We always talk about movies together. And then Tally Hare, this executive producer who I still work with all the time. And it was just a small team and we made it and we really only did 2 interviews for the whole thing. And a lot of it was just archival footage that Ray gave us. And it was just kind of a simple doc, but it really hit. And at the time, it actually set a Fox Sports record for best like original film they had. So I remember that being like, wow, this was really cool. And people really reacted well to it. And then the following year, we made the film Unrivaled, Earnhardt versus Gordon, which is all about the Jeff Gordon, Dale Earnhardt rivalry. And I would say that was probably one that was like, oh my gosh, it's crazy. And that's actually kind of long about reason we came up with the name Unrivaled. There was a couple other reasons, but that was one that like Jeff and I finally made that we're like, oh, this was pretty cool.
I just want to touch on like Refuse to Lose. So like how long, like, cause I think it's just the trailers on your Vimeo. Like how long is the actual full film and how long did you get to like edit it all up and from start to finish?
Yeah. So that film is about probably like 45 minutes with commercials. I mean, 45 minutes without commercials. With commercials, it's an hour. So it was an hour segment. But it aired going into Speed Weeks, which for those who don't know, Speed Weeks is leading up to the Daytona 500. They do a bunch of like qualifying races, this, that, and the other. So there's a lot of eyes kind of on it, but it was great because there's always like a lot of hype going into Daytona. People are excited. And it was the 20th anniversary of when they won the 500. So, yeah, it was awesome. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Like
And how long did it take to edit?
How long did it take to edit? It took, oh gosh, I mean, because there was so much footage, I remember starting on it prior to going like on Christmas, because NASCAR, we always got like pretty long breaks during Christmas because, you know, like the season we were going so hard. And I remember working on it probably, I would say even in like October a little bit, just going through all the footage. And I would say going through the footage took me the longest. And then once we went through the footage, we did the interviews, and then we kind of just flew through it in January. January was kind of when we did all the edits, and then the changes and everything like that with Fox. Fox was great to work with on that one. They're great to work with on pretty much any of the projects I do with them. But yeah, it was pretty smooth. I would say a lot of our docs we try to get done in a decent amount of time. You know, follow docs, you're kind of at the mercy of when the actual events happen. But this one, I mean, we probably spent 3 months on it, I would say, total.
Yeah, so like you mentioned that it was leading up to Speed Week. Do you kind of like from experience, you kind of seen all these different projects, they probably come to you and say, oh, we need to get something ready for this Speed Week or this like NFL Super Bowl's coming up, like let's get some stuff. Like, do you think about that for your own projects where you're kind of like you're pitching an idea, or you've come across an idea, like do you think, okay, when's a good time to release it?
All the time.
Like that, yeah.
All the time. Yeah. It's because when you have people investing and paying for these things, you have to give them a reason to make it, you know, because at the end of the day, it is, you know, they're looking to make money. I mean, it's about telling the story on my end, but when someone's paying for it, they want return on their investment. And you have to give them a reason to want to be involved. And luckily I'm surrounded by great people like, you know, like I mentioned Tally Hare earlier, who's an executive producer. He helps a lot with that. I have another guy, Brent Kunze, that I utilize for a lot of other things, who are great in those situations. I can tell them why the story is great and all that, but they help me to, you know, get those out there and sold to the world. And on top of that, you know, you want a lot of people to be able to check it out too, because it goes back to doing a justice to the story. So like finding those good times for people to watch it, you know, is great, because then it's like, oh, people are looking at what you spent the last, you know, several months working on. And, you know, it's also doing a justice to those who are in it. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think it's important, like that you've had that like inside look into like NASCAR and working with Fox Sports and kind of getting like the business side of it as well, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who just want to create an awesome film about like an amazing race car driver, but if they don't have that like background or like business mind in terms of when to release, how to release, who to sell it to, who's going to watch it, then it's kind of like they've wasted a lot of time putting it together, and they don't know how to sell it or where to sell it or how to get the most people to see it.
Yeah, well, and because release, yeah, and it's crucial, and I'm glad that's another thing too I've been lucky with, is being surrounded by people who have kind of taught me the importance of that. You know, like you've got to release things at a certain time. There's times when this will sell and there's times when this won't. Like, for example, Refuse to Lose, that was the 20th year anniversary. So it was a perfect time to air it, you know, with it being an anniversary year for them. Cool. Why not? You know, why not air it then? It just worked. And it was going into Daytona, that's the race that they won. So it was awesome. I mean, it is important, and it does help ratings, and it does just help the overall success of the documentary.
So nowadays, like, are you the one looking for new stories and maybe this would be a good project, or do people come to you and say, can you make something for this? I guess it's both.
Mm-hmm. I would definitely say it's a mix of both. Surprisingly, I still do have like a good amount of people coming to me with ideas already, and then I just work with them. I do actually edit a lot of films right now, like documentaries with Jeff. People will hire both of us to come in and then edit them. So sometimes it's already sold and we're just cranking, we're editors on it. You know, we're cranking away on whatever the topic is for a few months here and there. So yeah, it's a good mix of both. And I like that too, because sometimes I was having a conversation with someone about this the other day, you know, like they were frustrated because like a client was telling them to do something a certain way. It was for like an advertising commercial. And the way I saw it is, you know, I think that's something everyone struggles with when they're younger. And I'm going to get back to the point of this, but like, you know, someone bringing you a topic is not a bad thing. It's a great thing. You just get to find a way to tell it the best way possible. And again, to the facts, whatever it is. Sometimes even too, if it's a commercial, it's a different type of thing. But ultimately, it's what the client wants, and it's what someone's willing to pay you to go do to be creative. Like, that's awesome. And they're trusting you to be creative with it. Now, you know, that's where the question of feedback comes in. Some people really struggle with feedback. I feel like that's something a lot of people struggle with when they're younger. But once you get older, you know, I feel like you look at it differently. Just the further you get in your career, you have to respect the fact that, especially, I would say this happens even more in commercials than anything, you know, that either we sell or we get approached with. You have to understand, like, it's their brand. It's what they've had for X amount of years. It may be new, it may not be, but that's what they want to go with. So you just have to match whatever they want, and you get to be as creative with whatever concept they bring you, you know? So in a way, you get to be really creative with that. So I have a lot of fun with both, you know, like when it's your own, it's cool. You got to be kind of creative with it. And even with that, still expect adjustments. Like Steven Spielberg still gets feedback from whatever studio he's making a film for, because he's more than likely not paying for the film, you know? You know, there are some directors like Christopher Nolan probably works stuff in his contract where he doesn't get much feedback, but I'm sure he gets a little, you know? You can't avoid it. It's going to happen. Someone's writing the bill. You're going to get that feedback. And I think that comes with, like, I think it just makes it exciting. So I love getting stories brought to me that they're like, hey, can you make this and work with what I have? Or also pitching stuff too. But I always notice too, with pitching anything, people will hear it and then they'll be like, oh, well, what if we did it a little like this? Well, maybe actually that'd be kind of cool. Like, what if we released it then? You know, I thought now would be a good time, but maybe then would be. So, I don't know. I'm going way off here on a deep end, just off a topic, because I was having this conversation similar just in passing with someone recently about, like, man, I wish it was my own concept, you know, and not this. But there's something really cool about working with someone else's, that they, you know, whether it's a brand or something they bring to you, and then just trying to build off of what they have, because they're really entrusting a lot in you. And if they give you feedback, don't take it personally. It's just you know, it's their brand. They've been with it for a long time, and you're just there for a temporary amount of time. Just building off that, I just feel like it's so important just to, no matter what you're working on, throw your ego out the window. It doesn't matter what you've done. The current project, whatever you're working on, is what you're working on. You know, it doesn't matter what has been, it's what you're on. So, you know, if it's your vision, great, cool. Some people let you run with it, awesome, but they might also have feedback. And I think just, I've been fortunate to have been on so many different projects that I think I just learned this through experience. And everyone struggles with feedback at some point in time, because we're all human. But I think it's ultimately like, how are you going to respond to it? Are you going to respond to it and go, oh man, I didn't get to do what I wanted, so I'm just going to shut down and not do what the client wants here, or I'll do what they want, but I'm not going to give my best effort? I look at it from a different approach. I view it as like, okay, they gave me feedback. How can I make their vision as best as possible? You know, because sometimes the client comes to you and they have a vision on this, and you need to execute it, and you can be creative with that vision. But, you know, if they come with you with feedback, don't be surprised. You know, it's end of the day, especially commercials, man. I mean, it's their brand. They're very protective of it. They want it to do well. So
yeah, as part of the game. But the other thing is, like, when it comes to creating documentaries about a subject, it's very difficult to make something without them, like, trying to change the story, or like saying, I want to watch it, I want to change things. So I don't know if there's ways of kind of like negotiating with them to be like, we're not going to show you until the end, and you can't really tell us to change it really, because they might say, oh, I look bad in those pants or something. It's like, well, we can't change what you're wearing, or like your hair's a mess or whatever. It's like, that's what happened.
Yeah. I've been really fortunate with documentaries. I haven't had that kind of feedback yet where it's like, ooh, I don't look good in this. Take this out. Ours is more like, honestly, if anything, it's like kind of fighting over time. Like, can I get a couple more minutes for broadcast? You know, can this or that, you know, or like the music or the, you know, stuff like that. And the thing that's nice about docs though is, again, it's factual. So it's hard to get feedback on that. Usually it's more stuff like, ooh, well, what about the music here? Ooh, I don't know if I like this reenactment. It's kind of weird. Can you shoot it differently, or like a, you know, reshoot, or can you re-edit it, or and then also too, like, well, what if we went out and shot this at the end or something? It's just kind of like, it's stuff, and it's good too, because it makes you think, and then sometimes you're like, oh, that's really good, you know. And when you get close with those clients too, you come up with some pretty cool ideas. You know, there's the ending to Unrivaled, Earnhardt versus Gordon. It's Jeff Gordon standing at the statue of Dale Earnhardt out in Kannapolis, which is where he's from. And that was something that came about just through conversation with me and the executive producer. We were just talking and kind of saying, like, you know, Jeff was mentioning Dale a lot. And Jeff at the time, in like a week, he was getting nominated into the Hall of Fame. Like he was getting the big induction, I guess, not nominated, but his ceremony was going to happen. So he was in deep reflection on his entire career, and we were making this doc during that process. So it was all about Earnhardt Gordon, Earnhardt Gordon, Earnhardt Gordon. And you know, they really got huge in the 90s because of each other. And, you know, Dale had passed, and just kind of talking to the executive producer, we're like, what are we just felt like we were missing something at the end. And then, you know, we talked to some of the other producers as well, and we decided, look, let's go and ask Jeff if he wants to, maybe, like, I don't know if he knows about this statue. So we brought it up to him, and he's like, well, that'd be cool to go there. And we're like, well, can we film you? And so we did. And we went out there, and the last scene of the entire movie is him, like, out there just saying his thoughts in front of Dale. And he's kind of like really getting lost in that, you know, which is a really human thing, because it's kind of cool, because you had this really aggressive rivalry and the ending happened like that. But I think that's a good example of something where, like, we planned on it being something else initially, because I think initially it was just going to end with, like, you know, them racing each other or something, like highlights of it. And this was way better. I mean, people really responded well to it. And it's because rather than one person just thinking about it, there was multiple heads just having conversations about it. And then that came to be, you know, and it was so last minute. I mean, it was like one of those things, we had filmed everything. We hadn't filmed anything for like a month. And then we're like, well, let's go film this scene, you know? So, you know, because Jeff was like, I want to do it. And so we went out and did it. And it was totally raw. It was just, we just let him talk, and it was great. So being there for that scene was awesome. I mean, I was, like I said, a huge Gordon fan. I was there when Earnhardt died, actually, in 5th grade. I was on the backstretch. So to be there and kind of see that was pretty cool. And it's weird that I was there too, because I was just a fan, you know. I didn't even live in Florida, so the chances of me being there were very slim. But to be there and then be there for that end was cool.
Everybody, when they're watching a documentary, especially about like a athlete or a celebrity or someone that they really like, you know, if you can show them something new or unseen, like behind the scenes footage, or just try to get them, you know, not in the setting that they're normally in. Like most people are used to seeing them on the racetrack or the football field or wherever. You can see them in their home, or at least put them in a different scenario and try and show the audience a different side of them. Then it's something, yeah.
And what's cool about that too is when you go to those, like, I always, like, the cool thing about doing documentaries as opposed to like doing, I don't know, it just, because again, if it was like a narrative and you're going out there and filming, it would still be like a magical moment. But just the fact that it was completely real, and he was going out there and just literally we just said, like, you know, just say whatever you're thinking. And he was okay. So he went out and just started looking at it. And then all these memories and these emotions hit him, you know? And it's this really awesome moment. And Jeff, I think it was really cool for him. I remember him talking about it in another interview or something, just saying like, that was awesome. And that was something, again, like, had one person thought about it, I don't know if that would have came to be. I don't think like anyone would have thought like, oh, it'd be cool just to go to the stat. It was just like, I remember it being like, I was like, oh, hey, there's a statue in Kannapolis, because we were trying to figure out an alternative thing. And it caused all of us to think critically and go, well, what is this missing? You know? Well, it was this thing where like Jeff and Dale actually had this incredible respect for each other. And we weren't able to like show that visually, but this was a way to actually show it, you know, because Dale unfortunately is not around anymore, and this is a way to do that. So it was pretty cool. So
yeah, it's like a reunion type thing.
It'll surprise you when you listen to feedback, you know, because sometimes feedback will actually help guide the story to a better place than initially. And sometimes it's hard as a creative to see it that way at first, especially when you're young and new at it. I mean, I remember being younger and being, you know, especially in my early commercial days before I even came to NASCAR, just being like, man, you know, you question everything. You're like, man, they really didn't like that commercial. You know, it's like, well, they didn't really dislike it. It just didn't fit the vision of what they were going for. They didn't feel what they wanted to feel. So you need to go back to the drawing board sometimes.
What were you kind of thinking like back then? Were you kind of just like, okay, let's find these stories, or like bringing to you how can we kind of tell them like scene by scene? You kind of like just figuring it out, or like did you have like a grander vision?
I would say, I mean, seriously, like Unrivaled taught me a lot. I learned a lot during that entire process, and I think I utilized that because right after Unrivaled, if I'm correct, I think I may have done This Racing Life before. I can't remember which one came first, but I did this film called Best in Class, and it was like a classic car documentary that I directed with Jeff, and that was actually
found it on Amazon. That's why I was like trying to log in. I was like trying to find my password. Yeah, is that so? What was the idea? Did somebody come to you and say, we want to like promote this festival, like event, or like did somebody have some money to pay for it, or was it on your own? Like, how did that kind of, what about after that? Is there any certain projects?
Yeah. I mean, there's some that stick out. I really liked, I mean, I love This Racing Life. That was a cool story I did about a female racer out in Iowa, which was kind of cool for me because I'm from there, and Jeff and I become pretty good friends with her, and it's cool watching her career progress. So we followed her for a while, which I really enjoyed. But there was one film similar to that was kind of developed from there, because she actually, in a conversation with her, she mentioned this person out in Oklahoma named Brennan Wisley. I highly recommend, if I don't want to ruin the story for you, it's called Relentless, the Brennan Wisley story. We were really fortunate. It was nominated for Best Short Film at the Sports Emmys 2 years ago, I think, or a year and a half ago. And that was one of the coolest, most rewarding films I've ever worked on. It wasn't with a big athlete, anything like that, but just the story, my gosh. I mean, it's so inspirational. And I feel like there's moments in your career where you're sitting there and you leave and you feel like you learned something even outside of the filming, and that was one of them. I mean, that was just a really inspirational film for me personally and all that stuff. So yeah, my daughter's down here. Hi. Yeah, I'm on a podcast right now, so it's fun. Sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, I still think that was probably we probably conducted one of the most like emotional interviews we've ever done.
Like 24 minutes. I think this is it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that should be it. It's loaded with reenactments but nice. The story's just unbelievable. And you feel so bad for those people. But just how they kind of persevered, and this and the other. So I highly encourage anyone like interested to check it out. I mean, it's a story about perseverance. It's a story about overcoming major obstacles from all sorts of different angles, not just one. It was really cool for Jeff and I to work on. So I enjoyed that a lot. We've done a lot of other docs too that were really cool, but for some reason that one was awesome. The I don't know if I mentioned the Days of Thunder one we did already.
Yeah, you mentioned it, but
yeah, that one was really cool because that was kind of an unexpected film for us. Like we started off, like that was supposed to be a short film, and we were just going to interview drivers and stuff about like them filming the movie and this, that, and the other, and then COVID was happening during that, and we just reached out to a couple of people on IMDb, and in doing that, we ended up getting like a lot of people that were involved in that film, pretty much everyone, to kind of be a part of it through interviews and archival stuff, and getting Paramount Pictures footage. We interviewed Hans Zimmer for it because he did the score. We interviewed Jerry Bruckheimer, Michael Rooker, and then Carrie Elwes, just people like that like we would have probably never been able to interview. But just with the COVID situation, we were kind of able to get interviews with them, and they were so nice. And that was a surprising doc because that ended up being extremely entertaining. And it aired going into the Daytona 500 in 2021, I believe. But yeah, that was a surprise because it was supposed to just be a short film, and it ended up being this really successful full doc series that was really fun and very different from what I normally did. Because a lot of our stuff wasn't kind of tongue-in-cheek type stuff, but that I wouldn't say it was totally tongue-in-cheek because we did revolve around like Tony Scott as well and kind of his story. He's a director who had passed away, and his wife was involved in it in the film too because she was actually in the movie, and she lives here in North Carolina, so we were able to go film some scenes with her. But yeah, so crazy how that one worked out. Enjoyed that a lot. And then yeah, we've been working on some other stuff too as of late that have been really cool that just have not come out yet, that I'm really excited to eventually have people check out, but film. And there's some emotional elements to it too. At the end, it was really cool to see people's love for Tony Scott, and hearing guys like Hans Zimmer speak so highly of him, and Carrie Elwes and Jerry Bruckheimer and those guys. It was really cool. And it was a movie that I grew up watching a lot as a kid, so it was just so cool to like have worked on that, because it's definitely one of those things, if you're a NASCAR fan, that movie without question. So it was pretty fun. That one was neat. And yeah, we've just been doing a lot of commercials and a lot of other films since then too, but like I said, there's a couple I'm really excited about that just are not out yet, but they will be soon, hopefully. So, well, not hopefully they will be, but it's just going to be a minute.
I saw you did like a Ferrari thing, like up in, was it Pebble Beach? Do you want to talk about that?
Highway, yeah, that was super cool. Ferrari puts like they do a lot with Pebble Beach Concours, which is essentially like the Super Bowl of like car events in the world. And they put it on every year, and Ferrari has a huge presence there, and it's really actually awesome. I love their event. They do it the day before the actual concours. We get to do like a huge video for it every year. And that is so fun to work on. Cause you get to go have time with all these amazing Ferraris that are, new and new models. And it's a blast. Like this year we were out at, we filmed it out in, at Sonoma Raceway. And that was really fun with Justin Bell as our stunt driver. Cause he's a former race car driver, and he was awesome in it. So it was super cool. I love working on those, and Ferrari's awesome to work with. Torque's awesome to work with, and Ferrari's my favorite car. I don't have a Ferrari. I wish I did. It's awesome. So working on those is a real treat.
Well, thanks so much for talking with us. Is there anything like that you want to accomplish in the future? Like what kind of projects are you looking to create?
I mean, Jeff and I, we're just kind of along for the ride. We love just doing anything that's a really good story. So we always take on exciting projects that just get us excited. But we are trying to do a little more narrative now, which has kind of organically just been happening. So we're kind of entering that venture a little bit. Always going to stay in the documentary world a lot, but always liking new forms of media. We love learning. I don't think I've figured everything out at all. I don't view myself as an expert. I just, like everyone else, I'm just a student, just figuring this stuff out because it's constantly changing, and just having fun with it. So whatever comes next, I'm excited for sure.
As a last thought, do you have any advice for filmmakers who want to get into creating content, whether it be commercial, short films, or even like these long form documentaries that you worked on?
Get as many reps as you can. If you're younger, just start filming. I'm finding like some of the stuff that I do now, like I think I ironed out some of those wrinkles when I was younger, just even when I was doing stuff for free, when I was a kid, just filming with a home video camera. What we do is all about communication. So learning to communicate, tell stories with cameras when you're younger. I would also just say, if you have a vision and you want to go for it and it's what you want to do, don't let anything get in the way of that, really push towards it. I had a lot of moments in my life where I was, about to enter into the real world, if you will. And, I had opportunities to kind of settle into other jobs and other careers for that matter. And I turned them down, and I stayed the course. And I think what you'll find is as long as you stay the course and you work really hard, you can kind of get somewhat close to what you were going for, and you'll surprise yourself. But with that, always leave your ego at the door. No one likes working with anyone that's difficult to be around, and always be willing to learn, take advice from anyone and everyone, have your guard up on those kind of things. But a lot of times you can learn from anything, even if it's sometimes bad advice. You'd be surprised you can kind of learn from it. What I mean by that, you can get a bad YouTube comment on something, but maybe just kind of look at it and like, well, why did they feel that way? Okay, well, maybe they're onto something here. It's not always the nicest way they say it, but just be open to feedback, open to anything, and be nice. I mean, just be nice to everyone. Like, if you're a mean person, you're not going to work with a lot of people. You might work your way up fast, but ultimately it's just, I don't know, people tend to work with their friends. So I would just be nice to everyone, and you'll enjoy this, and you'll find more satisfaction out of this industry than anything if you're in it for the right reasons. So I guess that's my advice.
Go out here and take care of each other.